waste of time to study the history of a word. This is a quote by the French historian Lucien Febvre, and it is featured in an article about the etymology of the museum by Paula Finland. In the article, Finland writes, quote, "The word museum, however, is merely a starting point, a means of entering a wide range of philosophical discussions of knowing, perceiving, and classifying that emerged in the humanistic and encyclopedic traditions which collectors embraced and ultimately transformed during the 16th and 17th centuries. Through this approach, a manifest taxonomy of terms emerges. Although scores of words described collecting, collections, and museum-like activities, no one term was as comprehensive as museum itself. Yerern is also comprehensive, encompassing the words aksor, chaf, and godoraz, as Vartan will explain. But just as the term museum and so many others have evolved over time, so too has Yerern, and this is precisely what Vartan explores. He begins with an analysis of the term itself, evolving with the emergence of the term genocide and the struggle for genocide recognition, and he uncovers the use and abuse of the term by the Vatican, Turkey, and the United States and their ramifications. Vartan states, quote, "I do believe that I have made a contribution towards a better understanding of the need for a multifaceted approach to the issues of genocide, while bringing on the table an amount of information and analysis that was not readily available to scholars." And many scholars, from Professor Bedros del Matosyan of the University of Nebraska to Professor Hachik Toloyan of Wesleyan University, concur. Vartan Matosyan has been executive director of the Eastern Prelacy of the Armenian Apostolic Church of America, New York, since 2019. He's an Armenian studies scholar who specializes in history and literature, but also a translator, a teacher, and editor. Born in Montevideo, Uruguay, he moved to Buenos Aires, Argentina in 1973, graduating from the Armenian High School and the University of Buenos Aires. He has lived in New Jersey since 2000. He has taught Armenian history and language in Buenos Aires and New Jersey on elementary, high school, and college levels. He obtained his PhD in history from the Institute of History of the National Academy of Sciences in Armenia in 2006. He has published extensively in Armenian, Spanish, and English, including many scholarly articles, reviews, translations, commentaries, and other pieces, as well as 5 books in Armenian, 1 in Spanish, and 2 in English. Armenian Language Matters, and the Politics of Naming the Armenian Genocide, Language, History, and Menzierev. He has edited 25 volumes in Armenian, English, and Spanish, and translated 22 books into Spanish, English, and Armenian. Among his latest edited and translated books were several bilingual publications by the Prelacy, Hamas Stelz's House of Prayer, Domidas 150, and Gurgen Sarkisyan's My Memoirs. Սիրելի ներկաներ, այս քիրքի ներկայացմեն և ժամանակ դիվի դրամատվենք հեղինակին հետ հարց պատասխանի։ Այժմ եկեք թիմավորենք մեր օրվան հեղինակը 3 լեզուներու դիրաբեդող գիտնական պատմակեր Վարդան Մատոսյան։ Oh yes, there will be a question and answer after Vardhan's presentation.
His Eminence Archbishop Armenian, Prelate, Reverend Father Mesogakisyan, dear presence. Thank you for coming and sharing with me the joy of having this book published, which took me about 10 years until I brought it to its completion. I will try to explain some of the features of the book, or some of the aspects that I have touched upon in the book. And there is much more than my presentation there, of course, but I leave to you the pleasure of discovering it and discussing it and reflecting about it. I have to say that if you ask me, I wasn't that much interested into the aspects of the genocide as a scholarly subject until, despite the fact that I published a few articles dealing with various aspects, let's say the writers who perished in the genocide, survivor writers, and issues like that. But it was the idea, the fact of seeing how the Armenian language, in a sense, was being, I don't want to be too harsh with the term, violated by people that didn't know the language, first of all. And we are talking about one word in the language like they were the maximum authority, or they were the only ones with the intent and the knowledge to talk about it, and giving different senses and meanings to it. And at that point, I noticed that nobody was talking about it, or nobody was reacting about this issue, and I thought that, okay, I should be the one. I had some external pushing, so to speak, and I explained it in the preface to the book. And this is what it took me first to write a series of articles, which was published in the Armenian Weekly in 2012-13. And then, when I thought, okay, let's turn this into a book and just put together the articles, and that's it. But actually, it became a completely new book which I wrote from scratch. So what you will find in this book is practically a new text which uses some of the information that I had published at the time, but in a completely different context, and many times with new ideas and new approaches. So let's start with the PowerPoint, please. I would like to say that the book is dedicated to the memory of all the Armenian ecclesiastics who died or disappeared during the genocide, including my great-great-grandfather, Reverend Kalus Tisepian, who disappeared in the Syrian desert at some point in 1915, accompanying his flock. And for those of you who knew him, and they are majority here, he happened to be the great-grandfather of Reverend Musher Der Kalustia. And from him, from Der Kalus, comes the name of my grandmother's family, which is Der Kalustia. So let's start. Next. Now, the book has two parts and the conclusion. The first part is dedicated to the study of the issues of the word Iran itself, divided into three chapters. First of all, from the 5th century until the 19th century in classical Armenian and the beginning of the modern Armenian language. Then the period immediately before and after, between 1890 and 1922, so the use of Iran right before and right after the genocide. And the third chapter studies the issue of both the use of Medieval and genocide in Armenia and the diaspora after 1922 or over the past 100 years. This is and of course in the third chapter, the study of both words together is because, as you know, genocide was invented by Raphael Lemkin in 1944, and Armenians already started using genocide in Armenian, like with the word Tselaspanutyun, in 1945. The first use of Tselaspanutyun with the meaning genocide was 1945. But on the other hand, I happened to discover that Tselaspanutyun itself existed, of course, without the meaning genocide, before. So the first use I found, which may be not the actual first, but it is, so far it is it comes from 1916, and it was used exactly during the genocide. So with the meaning basically of race murder. Next. Now I want to explore a little bit, and it is important to understand where I'm coming from and where I'm going, the genealogy of the word Yerer. And I'm going to do some linguistics. I am not a linguist, but I like languages and I know a little bit about linguistics, so this is why I dare myself to enter into this field, and of course using works by other scholars and experts in linguistics. And I try to put together that information to come to a certain conclusion. And the conclusion is kind of this. First of all, we have the word Yerer, which has as the origin in the mother Indo-European language. You know, all the Indo-European languages like Farsi, Armenian, English, German, Russian, etc., etc. All those languages come from, according to the linguists, come from a mother language which existed in the 4th until the middle of the 3rd millennium before Christ. And in that language there was a root, a constructed root, because actually the word hasn't been written anywhere. That's why I use, and the scholars use asterisks to note those words that have been reconstructed. A root L, which meant to destroy, to spoil. And from that root L came Proto-Armenian, meaning the Armenian spoken but never written, because it was before the time of Mesopashtos. So that root L should have given root L in Armenian, which combined with the Armenian suffix er, so it became Yeler first, and then Yerer, because the L has had two different ways of showing in classical Armenian, which one as a L and the other as a H. So that Proto-Armenian root Eler became, it added another suffix, no or na, according to the reconstructions, which became Elerna or Elerno. And then in classical Armenian, in the 5th century, we come across Yerem, the combination of the root Yer plus the two suffixes Yer with Ra, with a strong Ra, like the word carro in Spanish, and the second suffix, which is a N. And with the meanings in classical Armenian of evil and crime. First evil and then crime, I have to say, as the first meaning being evil. Next. Now, the interesting thing is that we have a second root L, and there are several, but the second root L in Proto-Indo-European, which meant, we came too fast. Go back, this one.
Oh.
So, a second root L or ol in Proto-Indo-European, which was an onomatopoeic root for the sound of lamentation. As we have the word elegy in English, which is a poem of lamentation that comes from the Greek, elegeia, with that meaning. So, that root L combined at some point in Proto-Armenian with the suffix R, which gave in classical Armenian the word Yerar, which later was actually attested as or reconstructed as Yerer, because we don't have the word Yerer per se in classical Armenian, but we have the derivations of that word, like the word Yereradan, meaning lamentable, tragical, or something to be mourned. So the word Yerer means lament, mourning. And this is a word which is very close in sound, but not exactly the same sound as the word Yeren, because Yeren is with Ra, with a strong R, when Yerer is with a soft R, like in the Spanish word carro. One is carro, the other one is carro. That's the same Yerer, and the other is Yerer. So there is a phonetic difference as well as there is a semantic difference. we come to the conclusion that the Proto-Indo-European root L, which gave the classical Armenian Yerel, is different from the other Proto-Indo-European root L, or also attested as Or, or reconstructed as Or, which gave the classical Armenian Yerer, meaning lament or mourning. These two are two different words and two different coming from two different sources. So, what's the problem here? The problem here is that both roots, both words, were at some point in the 19th century identified or conflated, actually. The next one, please. In the 19th century, as I found out in the monumental Nor-Haigazian Lezvi Pararan, which was written by the new Haigazian language dictionary, which was compiled by three Mekhitarist fathers and published in 1836-37, and which is the main dictionary for classical Armenian. I mean, all the riches of classical Armenian, or most of them, of course, there are things that were discovered afterwards, but all the riches of classical Armenian are basically condensed in that dictionary, and from that dictionary, everybody went to drink their knowledge of Armenian, both classical and then modern Armenian, and this is the main source. So whatever was written there afterwards started to be used and copied and recopied by many dictionaries over time, and many words that were attested there entered also the modern language. So this identification that was there went at some point into the modern language. Next, please. But the issue is that before and after 1915, Yerel has two main meanings. Crime or heinous crime, which has a specialized term in French, which is forfait. And this word forfait in French does not have an equivalent in English, and the closest one is heinous crime. And then we come up that sometime between 1915 and 1965, the meaning massacre was also added to Yerem as a second meaning. And then, starting in 1965, we find that Med-Yerem, Med meaning great, of course, Med-Yerem was translated both as Great Massacres and Genocide of the Armenians, both translations at the same time. And starting in the 1970s, the translation Genocide of Yerem starts getting traction and becoming more and more used. And we can say that before 1915 and after 1915, Yerem was marginally used as a second meaning with the meaning tragedy or calamity. The issue is that what comes up is the following. When you say that a certain word means this, which meaning is that which you apply? The first meaning or the primary meaning or the secondary meaning? So, my contention is that if the word Yerel means crime, you have no right to use calamity or catastrophe or tragedy as if it was the main meaning, because it is the secondary meaning, as I have tried to explain and to show throughout my book, and especially in the first part of the book. Go ahead. Now, to prove this point a little bit, let's look at 6 key words that I have compiled here. You have 6 words, all starting or all being derivative or compound words with the word Yerer. You have the first one, Yerer Nagan, meaning criminal, like relative to the crime. And you have the word Yerer Nakor, which means also criminal, but as a noun or adjective, the perpetrator of the crime. A murderer is a Yerer Nakor, who commits a Yerer Nagan act, a criminal act. And what he commits is a Yerer Nakor Zutun, which means a crime, which may mean a criminal act, or which may mean simply an execution of a crime. And the person who studies crimes is called Yerer Napan, meaning criminologist. And If you try, let's say, for instance, when in 1981 John Hinckley tried to kill Ronald Reagan, that was a erreur rapport, meaning a criminal attempt. And finally, he was tried, and any other murder is tried, in a erreur adian, which means a criminal court. So, if you have 6 words that are all related to crime, and all have the word yerel, which one is the principal meaning? Crime or calamity? Are you going to try to someone in a tragedy court? Or an yerel is a tragedy or a wish? So this comes, and this kind of absurd question comes up when you start talking about the meaning of a word without context. And the entire issue of Mediterranean became use and abuse of the word because of the lack of context. And this is something that we should learn when we are trying to study this issue, which is that we need, when you explain something or you talk about a word, you need to have the context. If you don't have the context, you are not saying anything actually meaningful about the word. Next one. So here, there is another point. We can this issue of crime versus tragedy must be explained through a relation of causal effect. If you commit a crime, you are causing a tragedy, which means that a crime is seen from the viewpoint of the perpetrator, of the victimizer, the one who commits the crime, and the victimizer and the victim are connected by a relation of cause and effect. I am the victimizer, I commit a crime, and the victim is the one who suffers the action that I committed. Which means that if I commit a genocide, then there is a tragedy. But I am the genocider, and the other person is the person who, from her or his point of view, he feels a tragedy happening. He doesn't feel the crime, he feels the effect of the crime, which is what he feels or she feels as a tragedy or as a calamity. So, the victimizer performs the action, let's say deportation, through active verbs. You execute a deportation, you perpetrate a deportation, you execute a crime, you perpetrate a genocide, you do something, you make something. To effect agency, for instance, the genocide on the victim. But on the other hand, and these are active verbs, like execute. I execute something. But when you use passive verbs, like happened, this happened to the Armenians. Happen is an intransitive verb, it's a passive verb. So this reflects the victim's mental perception. Let's say this is, from the viewpoint of the victim, this is a tragedy. This is a calamity, this is a catastrophe. And of course, the Armenian genocide was also a tragedy, a calamity, or a catastrophe, or a disaster if you want. It's perfectly true, it's perfectly correct to use that. But you cannot say it was that, without saying, oh, there was something who did that. So the tragedy didn't happen in the vacuum. It didn't happen in the middle of nowhere. Something perpetrated tragedy. There is no tragedy without an action. This is the idea of the action and reaction, let's say, or the cause or effect. Because the perception of the victim is not an action. Next. Now I want to give you a little example from TV, something that I watched in May. So, in law and order organized crime, it happens that there is a black demonstration in New York, and one young black man who is an aspiring guitarist comes out from a music store. He had gone to buy, I don't remember if it was a guitar or some implements for the guitar. And when he came out, he comes out, two policemen are running there. And when they are running, they tackle him, thinking that he's one of the demonstrators or something. They tackle him. He falls to the floor. When he tries to reach out for his cell phone, which has fallen because he was talking over the phone when he comes out, when he tries to reach for the cell phone, one of the policemen just crushes his foot with his hand with his foot. So then there is a lawsuit against the NYPD, etc., etc. The next episode, you have the following dialogue between the detective, Elliot Stabler, which is the protagonist of the series, and the mother of the young man. And the detective says, "I'm sorry for what happened to your son. Something happened." And she corrects him. It didn't happen to him. It was done to him. So, you can go to this point. The massacre or deportation didn't happen to the Armenians. It was done to the Armenians. The tragedy didn't happen, of course, but it was the consequence of something which was done. So this relation of cause and effect should be always brought in mind when you are talking about what happened, for instance, in the Armenian genocide, but also for any other genocide or any other crime against humanity or atrocity or whatever you want to call it. Next. The second part of the book is an attempt to look into the matter of politics and the relations with language, and here is when things start to get a little more heated. So we have here 4 chapters. In the chapter 4, I tackled the issue of the John Paul II when, as you probably remember, in 2001 when he visited, he went to Armenia on the 1700th anniversary of Christianism. He went to pray to the monument of the genocide, this is Nagapert, and he had a prayer there, and he mentioned Medieval in that prayer, and all the halabaloo started why the Pope used Medieval, and he used Medieval because he wanted to skip the issue of genocide, etc., etc. So all this was very good. Of course, the media made the entire story, but I will explain in a second what happened actually. So the chapter 5 is about Turkey, and the main issue, there is all the background to the story, going to the late 2008 apology statement of a group of Turkish intellectuals, where they spoke about the great catastrophe in English, and they used it as translation of Medieval in Armenian. And this is something that then the policies of the Turkish state, I mean Erdogan and his government, actually, in a sense, they started to reflect what this statement had said, in a sense, and they came to the point that in 2014, as you probably remember too, Erdogan went to offer condolences to the Armenians, and the entire press and many politicians went over the board saying that, oh, what a great step that Erdogan says condolences to the Armenians. Like, it has never happened to any one of us who are forced to go to a funeral because of some business issue or whatever it is, and you go there and you shake their hands and say, okay, my condolences. So, which means absolutely nothing except that you say condolences, but it doesn't mean that you have a strong feeling about the person who died or even the person who is alive. So the next one, about the United States, I start from the time of Reagan and his use of genocide of the Armenians, which is a very interesting story per se, because as you probably remember, Reagan used the expression in a statement about the Holocaust in early 1981, and then Reagan became, until 2021, a kind of a hero to Armenians, because he had been the only American president who had used the word genocide. But everybody forgot that after the next 7 years, the Reagan administration turned the whole thing over its head, and they were in collusion with Turkey to deny the genocide at every moment. But everybody forgot that, and everybody clung upon that little genocide of the Armenians that he once said. And of course, everybody forgets also that that was also written by his Armenian speechwriter. Even though it went through the National Security Council and it was approved for whatever reason, but then the State Department took over and did whatever they want. And then we go from Reagan all the way down to Obama in that chapter. Chapter 7 is a nice little comparison between something that happened in Uruguay and something that happened in the United States, and how the words of recognition work in every thing. And then the conclusion. But I'm going to deal a little bit more with the context of the chapters in a second. So, let's remember that when John Paul II goes to Armenia in 2001, September 2001, he had received the visit of the Catholicos of all Armenians in November 2000, and they had co-signed a statement together where they mentioned that the Armenian genocide, which began the century, was a prologue to horrors that would follow, and every case is about genocides and the horrors that would follow, etc., etc., and that statement had the signature of both religious leaders. So, John Paul II had recognized the genocide before he went to Armenia. 9 months, 10 months before he went to Armenia. And the next day, after his prayer at Zizernagaper, he signs another declaration, another statement with Carekin, the Catholicos Carekin II, saying that the extermination of 1.5 million Armenian Christians in what is generally referred to as the first genocide of the 20th century and the subsequent annihilation of thousands under the former totalitarian regime, etc., etc. So, he recognizes twice the genocide using the word genocide. But here he is the leader of the State of Vatican. He's the political leader of the State of Vatican signing that declaration. But in the meantime, next one. In the meantime, he goes to Zizernagaper and he prays. He prays as the religious leader of the Vatican. And the fact that he had recognized the genocide 10 months before allowed him to use whatever words he wanted. And he used Mézières. Why not? Because the monument in Zizernagaper officially was known as the Mézières Nivushartsan, the memorial of the Mézières. So he's talking about this prayer, which was written especially for the occasion. He's talking about, listen, O Lord, to the lament that rises from this place. Remember, all of you who have been there, that you have the music and you have all the inspiration that comes from that place and all the memories that come to you, even though you don't see anything tragic there, but the monument itself inspires you with all that. To the call of the dead from the depths of the Mézières, because you are in a pit, right? Inside the memorial, you are in a pit. So you are in the call from the depths of the Mézières. And all that comes later, and then he evokes Pope Benedict XV, when he claimed for the genocide happening at that time, and the annihilation, etc., etc. So, you have here the story of how the words of John Paul II are twisted in the media, and how at that time already they start, if you read the newspapers and the news agencies, etc., of the time, which I have to document it as much as I could, you find all sorts of interpretations. The most interesting thing is one little point. The BBC and the New York Times took all pains to write about this prayer. But the next day, when John Paul II and Carekin II signed their declaration, you don't find a line either in BBC or in New York Times. They completely forgot it. So, and there is a lot written about that. You can read the details in the book. And then not only John Paul II, but also Benedict XVI, and then Pope Francis too. Next. Now, let's put it here. I mean, the interesting point is that the Vatican itself, when they make an official declaration about what Mézières means, they say that it means great evil or great crime. So they are recognizing those points. And on the other hand, I have to mention that the source practically for the prayer and the source for the use of Mézières was Father Levon Zekian, who is a well-known Armenian theologian and Armenian studies scholar, and who knows perfectly well what's going on, but he suggested the use of great evil, or the word evil, which is basically the 5th century meaning of the word, even if it has been used later on, but it's not the main meaning, in the modern meaning in the 20th century. But the problem comes with the case of in Turkey and in the United States, because in the 2000s, you start seeing how they pick up Mézières with the secondary meaning calamity or catastrophe as a tool for interpretive denial. What does it mean, interpretive denial? There are two types of denial. One is literal denial, when I just say there was no Armenian massacres. This is what the Turks used to do, like in 1965, when the president of Turkey at the time, 1965, said there is no thing called Armenian massacres, literally. That's one thing. But the Turks have evolved a little bit, and they understood that it's not possible to do that kind of denial. It's not easy to sell that. So they started a much more nuanced approach, which means to start to interpret, use words and expressions and documents, etc., to deny something by means of interpretation. So in this case, what do? What do they do? Not only the Turks, generally speaking, what does a denialist do? And this is a soft kind of denial, it's not a hard kind. They go and say, Armenians call it Mézières, which means great calamity or great catastrophe. So it means that this was a catastrophe or a calamity, because it's in the name. I can use the name, I'm using their name. And in this sense, I'm saying, okay, if the Armenians call it a catastrophe or calamity, why should I call it differently? Why are we talking about genocide when Armenians themselves, they name it calamity or catastrophe? Now, the problem is not them saying this. The problem is that Armenians accepted that as they say, at face value, and they just say, okay, this is the real, great catastrophe, calamity is the meaning of the word, and I don't want to hear about that word. The name of the Armenian genocide is Armenian genocide, period. It's not Mézières. But the people who said that, who incurred in what I call self-denial, and this is not self-denial in the sense of abnegation, this is self-denial in the sense of Peter denying his Lord for 3 times. And this is what where I see this, and this is one of the reasons I started looking into this subject, is that basically we were in the position of Peter. We were denying our language for 300 times, not 3. And because we were afraid, in the same sense that Peter was afraid of the Jews, and that's why he denied his Lord, we were afraid that, okay, I'm going to lose the recognition of the genocide if I get attached to my language. And on the other hand, because not only that, because I don't even know my language. Because most people talking about this stuff were people who didn't know Armenian. Armenians who didn't know Armenian. Many of them. And others who knew Armenian, they knew Armenian superficially and not with context. Again, we are going there. So, interesting point. I have not found any dictionary that used between 1915 and 2009 any bilingual dictionary that had said Yeger in Armenian and calamity or catastrophe in any other language for 94 years. So including the years when they started circulating that word, where did they got that word if the word didn't exist in any dictionary? Don't tell me that the foreign news agency knew Armenian. And interestingly, I started to compile, because I looked a couple, maybe 100 dictionaries from the past 2 centuries. I found 11 bilingual dictionaries that translated Yerem as genocide, literally genocide, in several languages between 1995 and 2014, which means that the word is not only used, as I have shown abundantly in the book, used in the newspapers, in books, etc., but it entered dictionaries too. So this as a preface to what is coming. Now, we find, as I mentioned, the Turkish Apology Campaign Statement 2008. My conscience does not accept the insensitivity shown to and the denial of the great catastrophe that the Ottoman Armenians were subjected to in 1915. I'm not going to analyze what the apology statement said, if it wasn't even an apology per se, etc., but it was about the denial of the great catastrophe. And as I mentioned down there, the English statement says great catastrophe, the Turkish statement says büyük felaket, which means exactly the same, or great disaster, or great calamity if you want, according to translations. And the Armenian is, because there is an Armenian statement too, Armenian Medzeren. Actually, the statement appeared in 11 languages. And most, if not all of them, use catastrophe, tragedy, or variation of that. The only one that it didn't actually say catastrophe was Medzeren, but that was what they meant to say. Next. Now, let's go to the United States. The first president who uses Medzeren is actually George Bush. George Bush used not one, twice Medzeren in 2003 and 2005. But he didn't use Medzeren in Armenian. He used Medzeren in translation. He wrote in his 2 statements, in the second one, I quote here the second, of course the first one is mentioned in the book too, this terrible event is what many Armenian people have come to call the Great Calamity. But the Armenian translation of this statement, which was released by the embassy of the US in Yerevan, it had Medzeren, so we know that it was Medzeren. And on the other hand, President Barack Obama was the first that used Medzeren, starting in 2009 and until 2016, from the first to the last. And then, of course, Donald Trump continued the same thing of using Medzeren in each and every statement. Now, next please. A couple of interesting things about what Obama did. He used Medzeren 13 times in his first 5 years. And his statement had a core which was every time the same text. As you can see, what is in yellow was repeated 6 times, or meaning every year, and what is in purple will appear 5 times out of 6. So this statement, the 5 lines which you have there, this is the core statement of his part of his statement, which appeared every year. I have consistently stated my own view, and my view has not changed. The Medzeren was one of worst atrocities. 1.5 million Armenians massacred or marched to their death, and I want the achievement of a full, frank, and just acknowledgement of the facts. Now, what were the central ideas of Obama's statement? The first one, of course, the reference to the state, the own view that has changed. He doesn't say what is his view, but we know what it is because he had stated first beforehand that he was all in favor of recognizing the genocide, etc., etc. But he doesn't say that here. The second is the admission of the facts, rephrasing and augmenting what George Bush had said in 2008. In 2008, Bush had spoken of mass killings and forced exile of as many as 1 million Armenians at the end of the Ottoman Empire. And he says directly 1.5 as a number, and he says that massacred and marched to their death. Forced exile doesn't imply that when you exile someone, he dies. But to say march to death, it means that they were exiled and killed. And the final one is full, frank, and just acknowledgement, which was, of course, addressed to the side that did not recognize the facts. And we all know which was the side that didn't recognize. So in that phrase, he was always pointing out to Turkey. And there is some reason that the Turks didn't like what Obama was saying and what any American president was saying, even though none of them used the word genocide. Next, please. Now, a couple of kind of intermediate conclusions that I have put in the book. Now let's notice that we have a legal word which is genocide. It was combined with the people named Armenian to get to the phrase Turkish genocide of the Armenians at first, which later went to become genocide of the Armenians, without many, of course, because the phrase was too long. Then it was abbreviated to genocide of the Armenians. Then was abbreviated to genocide of Armenians, and finally into Armenian genocide. And then Armenian genocide was capitalized and became Armenian genocide with capital A and capital G, because it was thought that using Armenian genocide in capital letters, it will bolster the prospects of recognition, and people will be more inclined to recognize something which is written in capital letters than in small letters. But the fact is that Armenian genocide with capital letters is not the name of what happened. This is my contention, because if we make a comparison, we know that the genocide of the Jews is called Shoah in Hebrew, or translation Holocaust, their own translation, which actually Shoah means catastrophe. And the Ukrainian genocide has a proper name too, which is Holodomor, which means the Great Famine. And why, if the Ukrainians and the Jews have a proper name, the Armenians don't have? Of course the Armenians have. It's called Mezirem, which means literally great crime, but in the past 30 or 40 years has started to mean great genocide, literally speaking, because the word Yeren is used with the meaning genocide. And if that's the case, then we can say, we come with the following syllogism. Teraspanutyun, there is an Armenian word for genocide. Yeren is another word for genocide. Then Yeren is synonym to Teraspanutyun, because Yeren also means genocide. So Yeren is another word for genocide. So when someone says Mezirem, please don't get your hair out, or don't pull your hair, saying what have you done? You did nothing. You just used the same word genocide, but in another meaning. Why? There is only one way to call genocide. The Germans have two words. Why the Turks have two words? Why Armenians cannot have two? Next. So I bring you a couple of what if scenarios. If we get the Turkish apology campaign statement, and when they said great catastrophe, and in Armenian Mezirem, we had read that as great genocide, and we had told to the Turks, thank you for recognizing the denial of great catastrophe. And you know that you used our word Mezirem, and that means great genocide. So you have recognized the genocide. And what if Obama's statement in 2009, instead of shouting at Obama for trashing his own promise of recognizing genocide, we had gone and said, Mr. Obama, thank you. You have just recognized the genocide because you used Mezirem. What would have happened? Worst case scenario, they would have gone and put Mezirem, under the rug and forgotten about it. Or, we committed a mistake. Someone did something wrong. But that word would have never been used again, at least, and that word wouldn't have been abused as it was for the next 10 years. Next one. And I want to think a little aloud. Probably you have heard, or you know, that it is said that Uruguay was the first country that recognized the genocide. But I have a little issue. The issue is the following. There is a law. Uruguay recognized the genocide with the law of the Congress for recognizing April 24, 1965 as the day of commemoration. And it was only for that year. Then in 2004, they have passed another law for every April 24. The law of 2004 repeated the first article of 1965, which says, April 24 is declared Day of Remembrance for the Armenian martyrs in homage of the members of that nationality assassinated in 1915. Do you see the word genocide there? No. The word genocide is mentioned in the exposition of motives of the law. Exposition of motives is what the legislator writes to justify why he's putting this bill to vote, or is bringing for a vote or for approval, etc., etc. It's there. Genocide, the word genocide is used 4 times there, but not in the law. But again, we say, not only we, everybody says, the Turks included, that Uruguay was the first country to recognize the genocide. No word there. The President of the United States did not recognize the Armenian genocide, we say, meaning in this case Obama. Now, this year we mark the centenary of the Mediterranean, which means Great Genocide, the first mass atrocity of the 20th century, etc., etc. This is part of what he wrote in 2015, the centennial, which changed the template that I mentioned before. Here, there were many modifications. So apparently, because it was 2015, and also because Pope Francis had recognized the genocide, and Austria and Germany, and there were very strong declarations all over the place. So Obama's speechwriters went to change the text. So first time they used mass atrocity, and I will explain in a second what does it mean, because it's not the same as atrocity. And they used for the first time the word deported, which is a legal term, which is included in the Statute of Rome of 2003, which is the Statute of the International Court of Justice. In other words, and I explain over there, I make an analysis of what the legal terms that were used here, and as well as all the things that they did to skip, not mentioning genocide in this same text. Next one. So remember, mass atrocity. Now, again, this year we mark the centenary of the Mediterranean, the first mass atrocity of the 20th century. There is a legal, in the past 10-15 years, in the legal field of genocide, there is an evolution in terms, an evolution in concepts, and the word atrocity doesn't mean the same that it meant like 100 years ago. In 2011, it was created an Atrocities Prevention Board within the National Security Council here in the United States, which was created, of course, under during Barack Obama's presidency. And the use of the word atrocity evolved to the point that in 2018, it was passed by Congress and signed by President Trump at the time. It was called the Elie Wiesel Genocide and Atrocities Prevention Act of 2018. And in that act, there is a note which says that the term genocide means an offense under subsection of the US Code. The term atrocities means war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. So when Obama said the first mass atrocity of genocide, everybody in the Armenian press went out like crazy saying, oh, he's calling it just atrocities as usual. No,
He was calling it mass atrocity, which is a legal term. At least now it's law. So we have a few things to learn, I believe, when we are doing our lobby and things like that, and whatever our political parties and our political activists do. They need to learn two things. First of all, to read better what it comes before their eyes, and second one, to really learn Armenian. Next one. Now, the use and abuse of Menzirel got to the point that we have here Barack Obama's final statement in April 2016, and what you see here in blue, all that you see here in blue, like for instance, mass atrocity in the 20th century, honor the memory of those who suffered during the dark days, etc., and all those things in blue were basically plagiarized in 2017 by his successor, Donald Trump. Please turn it. Yeah, you see why. Because this is it has nothing to do with one president or other president. It's the fact that it was the abuse of the text or the abuse of Menzirel went to the point that it was not only about using the term. It was just people, they didn't care about what they were writing and what the statement meant. And was, you know, why do I need to, let's use every year the same words and let's copy whatever he said a year before. Who cares? We just get rid of this for the year, and who cares what the Armenians will say? We just repeat the words and whatever. Who's going to remember what they wrote a year before? So this is what you come to the point when you don't do nothing, people just start laughing at you. Yes. Now, in conclusion, or the concluding part of in the book, I put two appendices which are interesting per se. The first one, what Yerel meant in scholarship, meaning all the translations that we have into English of the word, all the uses of all the times when the scholars in English or other foreign Western languages have used Yerel, and what kind of translation they gave, and you will find a very interesting gallery of people writing 1 year crime, the next year calamity, the next year massacre, 3 years later again crime, and 4 years later maybe genocide. It's very interesting. I have made an extensive list there. And the second appendix is more interesting, I believe, because this is a funny story in a sense. In 2000, one commentator in a newspaper in California wrote an article in Armenian saying that, you know, the word Menzirel, the use of the word Menzirel is against the recognition of the genocide, and for this and that reason, because it doesn't mean genocide, etc., and we have to, and the use of the word in the Armenian monuments, memorials, should be banned. All the uses of the word in the Armenian memorials should be erased, and the word Yerel should be erased from our dictionaries too, or from our newspapers too. So I made a point to myself to start collecting all the inscriptions in the memorials that we have all over the world, in Armenian or any other language available to me, and even languages that are not available to me, but that much I could do, which mention Yerel or genocide, or both. So I made a list of 114 inscriptions all over the place, and showed that it came out that actually between 70 and 80% of those inscriptions actually had genocide. The portion that had the word Yerel was minimal in comparison, and some other very interesting conclusions. But the interesting point is that nobody has done that kind of text or the compilation of text of the memorials, and for the first time there is a quite good, I believe, translation of all those texts into English, and you can see what this memorial says in Armenian, in English, sometimes the Armenian, English, Turkish, and Greek, etc., etc., etc. Next. Now, to end, and I'm sorry if I took too long, but I wanted to bring you a few graphic or a few illustrations of what I have said, especially because there are no pictures in the book. So this is kind of a very little piece of documentation of what I have spoken tonight. This is from the website of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Armenia. This was in September 6, 2018. In Armenia. So you have here interesting cultural genocide, as you know, is not a legal term. Cultural genocide was not recognized by the UN in the convention, the Genocide Convention. But the term exists. The idea exists at least. So the Ministry of Foreign Affairs speaks about the cultural genocide in English, and in Armenian they use Meshautainiagan. This is a map I came across a few weeks ago. It was published in Armenia on the Centennial, and this is actually not the map, but it's just an ad about the map. And you just need to see the title of the map, which says Hayot Meziererne, and in English, Armenian Genocide. It doesn't say Hayot Tzeraspanutiuna, it says Hayot Meziererne. Why? Again, one is translating the other. Next. And I'm going down in chronological terms. I will end in 1965. This is the picture that is on the cover of the book. Here, and it's a very interesting picture. This is a mini reproduction of the monument of Zizela Gaper, being as a crown of flowers being taken to the monument itself. So they are walking towards the monument, and you see here on the left 1915, and you have there the four dates of 1896, the Hamidian massacres, 1909 the Adana massacres, 1988 the massacres of Sumgait, 1990 the massacres of Baku. And on the right side you have, on the left it says genocide, on the right it says Yerem 75. Of course you will tell me, okay, Yerem is a short word, it's shorter than Tzeraspanutiun, that's why they put it there. Yeah, okay, but they could have made a way to put Tzeraspanutiun, but they chose to do it this way. Next one. Now we come to closer places and better known places. I haven't been there one day, but one day I hope to go and take the picture by myself. This is the Khachkar in Niagara Falls, which was the first monument to the genocide in the United States, which used the word Yerem. And you have the inscription there, which says, Khachkari Hishadak Hazar Dasnik Yererni Haina Hadagats, Khachkar in memory of the Armenian martyrs of the Yerer of 1915. And in English it says, in memoriam Armenian martyrs of 1915 genocide. I don't think that I need to say anything else. They could have said 1915 Yetzeras Panutian, Haina Hadagats, but they didn't. Next. Now, this is the inscription on the grave of Solomon Telilian in the cemetery of Fresno, Arad cemetery of Fresno, which was put in 1969 and was renovated in the 90s. This is not a genocide memorial per se, but it contains the first inscription that is about the genocide. And you have here the translation of the Armenian text where they use the word Tzeraspan for Talyat Pasha. And they call what happened in 1915 the April Yerer, Aprilian Yerer. But the English version of the text says principal principal Turkish perpetrator of the Armenian genocide of 1915. Again. And they kept the inscription the same 25 years later when they renovated the monument. They could have changed it, but they didn't. But so you have here April Yerer in Armenian, you have Genocide of 1915 in English. Next. These are the Cinderella stamps. This is a technical term used for those stamps who have no value, no commercial value, and they are not in official circulation. So this kind of Cinderella stamps, you may probably remember, we used to have many of them about different subjects from the 60s and all over the world, not only in the United States. And you have two here, both on the 50th anniversary of the genocide. One of them in Armenian, it says, Hisnamia Gaigan Yeremni, meaning the 50th anniversary of the Armenian Yerem, and the English portion says 50th anniversary of the Turkish genocide of the Armenians. So, Yerem in Armenian, Turkish genocide of the Armenians in English. And the one at the bottom, again the same thing, Hisunamia Yerem, 50th anniversary of the Yerem, and 50th commemoration of the Armenian genocide. One more to finish. And this is very interesting. These two booklets, one in Armenian, one in English, are part of a collection of booklets which were published in 1965, but 50th anniversary commemoration committee that was in Boston, and which had its headquarters in the Heineken building in Boston. So the Armenian booklet by Yervant Khadanasyan, it was published by the 50th Yereni Islamiyagi Getronagan Hansakhub, the 50th anniversary of the Yeren Central Committee. And the English one was published by the commemorative committee of the 50th anniversary of the Turkish genocide of the Armenians. So again, you call it Yeren in Armenian, you call it genocide in English. And the word Seaspautun had existed for 20 years. It wasn't a new word. So it means that there is some kind of, since 1965 up to this day, there is an identification between the two terms. And this is one of the many takes that I have tried to show in this book, and which I believe, as Anna had mentioned so kindly, it is something which I hope with this book I have been able to offer some new material for the consideration of the genocide, the actual genocide scholars, especially since many of them do not know Armenian, or they do not take care of having Armenian materials or going to see what the Armenian text may offer to understand better a genocide, which is not just facts and figures about what happened. And I would like to mention that I haven't dealt with if it was a genocide or not, if it was 1.5 million or 800,000 or 200,000 or all that kind of polemics that the Turks are so fond of doing. I have not dealt with those because for me they are not issues. I was not going to deal with those kind of issues. My purpose has been basically to show that there is a very subtle denial going on, which I have tried to show what kind of denial it is, and on the other hand, that denial needs to be exposed, but needs to be exposed also by us knowing what we are talking about. And again, it's the same. If you know your language, you know what you are talking about. If not, you are talking about something which is totally immaterial and very hard to understand because you don't have the tools to understand. Thank you very much, and I'm open to your questions.